Hello there. We are continuing our Road and Track reading from the November 2019 issue. Peaks and Valleys. A car enthusiast acknowledges humanity's biggest problem from a national park and a pickup, and the largest glacial melt in the lower 48. A lot of people won't like that this story was written. Discussing climate change in a car magazine orbits contradiction. These pages have always been a relief from the rest of the world, and conventional wisdom holds that if your topics stray too far off pace, readers will leave. We will get letters for these words, but that doesn't change reality. Climate change is undeniably controversial, but also undeniably connected to human transportation. If you have both a conscience and a car, or if you fly the airlines or board boats or use ride sharing or take public transit, the subject has likely crossed your mind. Every one of us is complicit. The planet is changing and we know why. Is it possible to reconcile that complicity with loving the automobile? The noise, style, and feedback that make a great car great? Perhaps. But we have to talk about the introspection responsibly and realistically. More to the point, how on earth can we not? Last summer, as a way to think about all of this, I got in a brand new Ford F-150 and drove to Glacier National Park. I chose an XLT 4x4 crew cab model because it is the single best-selling variant of the best-selling vehicle in America and thus the most common automotive experience in the country. Ford will sell around 900,000 F-Series trucks in the United States this year, and our test example, fresh from the plant in Dearborn, went to a small corner of northwest Montana, where the land was long ago carved away by ice as broad as a city and as much as a mile deep, and where climate change has caused similar ice to melt in quick and obvious fashion. I went to one of America's largest stashes of glaciers and to acknowledge the conflict of loving a problematic machine. The internal combustion engine has done a lot of good in the world, but it has also produced at least as much environmental damage as any other human invention. Electric cars are better on this front, but even they require the burning of fossil fuels for the mining of the rare earth minerals in their hardware, for the construction of their leathers and plastics, for the generation of a portion of their electricity. The science here is not new, but its conclusions are worth repeating. The chemical bits emitted by automobiles and their production reorganize the atmosphere. As a result, the planet is warming and cooling as it recently has not, and we get increasingly strange and often catastrophic weather. Stretch that timeline out long enough and coastal cities are underwater and the earth looks and works a lot differently, generally in ways that will make human existence more costly and difficult. The irony is obvious. Car riders choose on climate change by driving somewhere, consuming non-renewable resources to visit a place where use of those resources has caused us to consume more non-renewable resources. But how else do you go anywhere in America? Outside of a few select corridors, our public transit is patiently terrible. And at the risk of sounding like a selfish ostrich, I like driving. You control a satisfying machine. Travel independently and with minimal restriction. In this vast country built by and for the automobile, the machine too often makes sense. A journalist and a photographer in a truck for 2 days in one of America's most spectacular national parks. I found no answers. I didn't expect to, but the questions got a little sharper. 75 million years ago, a shifting of plates in the Earth's crust caused great stacks of rock to shove up from the plains of what is now northwest Montana, the Earth folding and cracking skyward. The result was the northern range of the Rocky Mountains. The Rockies are narrow here, barely 35 miles wide. When the mountains were young, their peaks and deep valleys caught clouds. The region eventually trapped so much moisture that its winter snowfields became glaciers, enormous ice packs capable of surviving 4 seasons. The largest in the area were almost incomprehensibly vast, but 12,000 years ago, at the end of the Ice Age, the last of those big glaciers melted and the mountains were once again free. The ice left behind alpine finger lakes, hundreds of feet deep and filled with crystalline glacial melt, along with visible change on the mountainsides. The sharper peaks, horn-like in shape, had been carved by glaciers pushing against them for eons. Their rounder sister peaks are generally older, ground down by water and weather and time. All of these mountains sit above the deep, broad valleys because the glaciers cut the land wider than any river could. This is Glacier National Park. Imagine the Alps with more air in Copeland. Even by the heady standards of America's national parks, Glacier's beauty is remarkable. In the early 1900s, George Grinnell, a founding member of the Audubon Society, was so enthralled that he dubbed the area the crown of the continent. Crown carries a double meaning: gem-like landscape, but also the fact that the park's streams are headwaters draining into 3 major North American river systems. Waters from the area flow into Hudson Bay, the Pacific, and the Gulf of Mexico, and Glacier is one of the few places on the continent where all native carnivores survive and thrive. More than 70 species of mammals in all, plus 250 kinds of birds, and more than 25 species of native fish. It's an idyllic and virtually undisturbed sampling of the old American West, a wilderness ideal come to life. And like the rest of the planet, it is changing. The USGS defines a glacier as a mass of compacted ice at least a tenth of a square kilometer in surface area, or around 25 acres, and large enough to move under the influence of gravity. Glaciers form when deep snow melts and refreezes, in eras when winter snowfall outpaces summer melting. According to the USGS, the area containing Glacier National Park held an estimated 150 glaciers in 1850, each at least 7,000 years old. The park itself wasn't established until 1910. By 1966, that number had shrunk to 35. In 2019, there are 25. The park's glaciers, like most of the world, are now in general retreat. The aggressive rate of that retreat makes sense, considering the last half-century's general global increase to average summer temperatures and how the planet's dominant form of annual precipitation has, in the last century, shifted from snow to rain. Because glaciers are dynamic by nature, their size evolves naturally. But on average, between 1966 and 2014, the glaciers in the park shrank a whopping 39%. Some have shrunk by as much as 85%. The rest of the story should not be news. Current atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, greenhouse gases, are unprecedented in at least the last 800,000 years. The effects of those concentrations are without parallel in millennia and extremely likely to have been the dominant cause of observed warming since the middle of the last century. The transportation sector alone is estimated to have accounted for 14% of the greenhouse gas emissions originating in human activity. And so we come back to pointing the finger at cars. Some people believe that the majority of climate change is simply incorrect, that humanity cannot have been responsible. You have to wonder if the scientific community grows tired of the back and forth. While researching this story, I asked a respected American climatologist for help parsing a thick report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN, appointed body tasked with analyzing recent credible climate science. And while climatologists asked to not be named, she did allow as how controversy surrounding the subject has prompted extreme caution in public comment. The panel, she said, they'll argue for hours on word choice in the reports, on single words, and the reports are the most inarguable science we've got. When I told her that the National Park Service hadn't returned R&T's request for comment on glacial change in Glacier, she didn't sound surprised. It's not politically, and here she paused, watching her words. They have to be careful. It can seem more than a little strange that much of the scientific community believes one thing and much of humanity believes the opposite. But then, much of humanity once held that the world was flat and that dragons lived at the edges of maps. When I drove to Glacier in the Ford, emitting carbon for personal purpose, I was not alone. Lines of cars at every turn, thousands of visitors on an otherwise ordinary summer day. On that first morning in the park, idling in line at the gate and waiting to pay to enter, I looked around the F-150's interior with its screens and plastics and gadgets. It seemed irresponsible, or at least a little unfriendly, to not at least consider the possibility that scientific consensus is wrong, that maybe there are dragons. A moment later, I found myself making a mental tally of people throughout history who famously did well by betting against science. My money's not on the dragons. You can walk into Glacier, but almost everyone drives. The parks saw more than 2.9 million visitors in 2018, and many took the primary scenic route, a two-lane designed to be driven eastward. The 50 miles of asphalt on the aptly named Going to the Sun Road comprise one of the country's most famous drives, a sort of greatest hits package of Glacier's beauty. Much of the area is only reachable by hike or horse or empty much of the year, but Going to the Sun is almost never barren. Summers bring lines of barely moving traffic and roadside bathrooms with wait lines stretching down the shoulder. The F-150 did that thing that all good trucks do and got out of the way. It seemed a plane over the road at highway speed. Upon its heels, like a 60s Ford Galaxy with better dampening. It was happy carrying two people and their luggage, though we were also wasting 3 seatbelts, thousands of pounds of tow capacity, and an entire truck bed. Much of what America does in a pickup, we could do that in a Honda Fit, if we're being honest. Does it make me a bad person, wanting a truck because I like driving them, yet have no practical need for one? Am I ushering in the apocalypse because I take long drives in sports cars in the evening as a way to unwind? Because much of my life has rotated around the enjoyment of the automobile? Why do these questions feel both crucial and slightly ridiculous to type out? Most of the park's glaciers are buried in the interior, but a handful are visible from Going to the Sun. Jackson Glacier, the 7th largest of the 25 remaining, is the largest visible from the road. Since many visitors don't venture much beyond their cars, Jackson is likely the most viewed piece of ice in the place. You could drive right by without noticing. Many of the park's glaciers simply blend into the astounding vistas, drowned out by the visceral scream of the surrounding mountains. I grabbed a map in a ranger station because it held scale illustrations of the region's ice, indicating change in size over time. Later, I went searching for Jackson and drove to it, only to spend a minute wondering if I was in the right place. There was snow, but nothing like you'd expect. The book showed landed icebergs. This is the problem in a nutshell. Jackson began the last century bridging two mountains, a 316-acre ice sprawl with a snow-covered island. What remains covers is just 187 acres and sits quietly in the notch between these mountains, a stripe of icing on a pile of lumpy rock. The view is pristine and immensely beautiful, but can also seem oddly empty, as if the various local signs and maps had been accidentally set up to point you toward a homely stack of leftover winter. We drove on, basking in the silence and landscape. Other glaciers appeared in the distance, dirty white smudges on the land, exactly where the map said they would be, smallish and forgettable. We poked around, chasing the other ice visible from going to the sun. Parking the Ford were convenient and standing in the bed to gape. A park ranger at one of Glacier's gift shops told me that you really have to hike to see the remaining big ice, but we had brought no gear, and for our purposes, leaving the truck seemed like cheating. It would have been less than enough if we hadn't kept driving, almost randomly, with no plan, as most people do in parks. Eventually, we arrived at a lodge on Glacier's east side. The building sat in a breathtaking notch in the land, and the base of yet another cobalt alpine lake. The water was deep and eerily still. Poking around the lobby, I stumbled onto a wall of photographs, an exhibition documenting a century of the park's change. Poster-sized black and white images of glaciers from the early 20th century were hung above modern images taken from the same vantage point. The difference was staggering. The same shots over and over. Half a mountain covered by a wall of sloping ice in grayscale. The same mountain, almost never bare, but in color. Rivers where there had once been vast expanses of white. Small peaks that had been buried in ice for millennia, newly exposed, shading old valleys that had spent thousands of years filled and hidden from sun. I stood in front of that wall, barely blinking, and for a long while unaware of time passing until the dryness burned my eyes. Then I walked outside and stared at the ground for a bit, surrounded by mountains but somehow unable to look up. This is what I had come to find. I just ran the trip in the wrong order. That UN panel publishes a summary of its findings every few years, a sort of high-altitude analysis of the relevant international science on all things climate. Each report is hundreds of pages, while sections on subjects like warming mitigation, cost, and greenhouse gas scenarios and atmospheric CO2 change rate. The glut of information can be overwhelming, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't look at it. Before heading to Glacier, I dived into the most recent report, published in 2014. As an afterthought of boggling at data, I fell into the panel's 40-page policymaker summary, a cliff notes of speaking points aimed at politicians. Its graphs and charts paint along an ominous curve, the numbers getting larger as the years go by, the only noticeable decrease being the chance of change, of doing anything about it. The problem can seem so large, so distant, and on a personal level, what can we do anyway? Tell people to go home, to walk up those mountains, to move to an overcrowded city they can't afford simply to give up cars and ride the subway? There are no easy answers. We have made the automobile so much a part of our lives and our landscape for so long that it's sometimes difficult to acknowledge that roads cannot expand forever. That traffic and pollution left unchecked will inevitably worsen as the world's population grows. It's equally difficult to adore the machine while recognizing its problems, acknowledging that you can love what the device does for us while also despising much of what it has done to us, the ways in which it has made us dependent. Going to the sun peaks at the Logan Pass Visitor Center, 6640 feet high, and smack in the middle of Glacier's eastern range. The center perches on a ridge overlooking a long circular valley, a west-east scoop in the land. On the second day, we woke at 3:30 a.m. and headed to the pass to watch the sunrise. The Ford ate going to the sun in the way that modern live-action or turbocharged things tend to eat anything mountainous, which is to say, quickly and with fun motion over bumps. And there was, for once, almost no traffic. The Logan Pass parking lot was nearly empty when we arrived, so I parked near its edge and walked to an outcropping. The glow broke first over the ridge to the north, a wash of orange and blue pastels. The light grew whiter and brighter every minute, bubbling and flowing into the valley's necks, refracting off airborne dust and filling the pass with a warmth and gauzy light that poured over the hills and rapidly deepened. It was like watching God stretch. An 80s Dodge Ram long bed pulled into the lot and rolled up nearby, idling, its exhaust breaking the silence. A small group had gathered, about 10 campers and hikers, and a few of them glanced instinctively at the noise. The driver seemed to notice, shutting off the truck. The Ram was well maintained but thick with patina, faded paint, and crusty steel wheels that appeared to have spent life in a riverbed. On any other day, I would have walked over and said hi, asking about it, but I couldn't remember wanting to be near a vehicle less. A small part of my brain acknowledged the irony and put it away for later. The parking lot filled, maybe 100 cars in all. People and chatter, and then it was over. The lot warming in direct sun, the magic and silence gone. Friends who have gone through drug rehabilitation say that climate change is like any other addiction. The human culture is currently on the period before rehab, where you realize your problem but haven't yet to kick it. The analogy is cliche and probably inadequate, but apt is in one sense. Addictions generally end in one of two ways, and one is more dire than the other. What either of these ends means for the automobile isn't yet clear, but we undoubtedly have a choice. There's a path out of this problem, one that contains the freedom and goodness of one of the 20th century's greatest machines, and some sacrifice, but none of the downsides. If we can suss a moon landing and the affordable pocket computer, we can suss this. But sussing it means admitting the problem exists, even when you don't want to, even in a place and time when you would rather be doing anything else. As we packed the Ford and prepared to leave, I glanced down the mountain. The road up the ridge was still shrouded in purple shadow, the valley so deep that the rising sun had yet to find its way in. A chain of distant headlights twinkled back from that pocket of headlights, climbing toward us, pair after pair. The everything machine. The fastest, most powerful Cayenne is a hybrid, and surprise, it's great. The day ran on forever, 16 long hours of sunlight. Early June in Gotland, Sweden is a treat that way, recompense for the dark winter months. The island's 60,000 permanent residents refuse to waste a second of it. They bathe in the daylight, turn their faces to the sun, close their eyes, breathe in it. Over the summer, the place will flood with some 1.6 million tourists, but that was a few weeks away. For the moment, it was just the locals, an empty race circuit, and us in the 670 horsepower Porsche Cayenne Turbo SE Hybrid, now the fastest production Cayenne in existence. Porsche has developed a knack for justifying the choices in the face of skepticism. It started with the water-cooled Boxster and 996 generation 911 cars that left air-cooled traditionalists behind but paved the way to profitability. When the company announced the Cayenne, a high-riding, front-engine all-wheel drive SUV without so much a hint of motorsport pretense, we winced. Then the company sold more than 200,000 examples over 15 years, helping define a generation of sports car and racing development. So much for the skeptics. The real shock was not the cash grab ploy of a mass-market model, but that the vehicle was better than it needed to be. The Cayenne was far from the lightweight coupes that brought the brand to prominence, but it wasn't merely a rebadged Volkswagen. It was capable of billy-goating across Siberia and devouring Silverstone in an equal measure. The buyers who will attempt either probably number in the single digits, but Porsche doesn't seem to care. The effort paid off, igniting a blaze of luxury SUVs that culminated in vehicles like the Lamborghini Urus, the Bentley Bentayga, and the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. So the Porsche's current problem isn't justification, but relevance. The Cayenne finds itself adrift in a category it created, with hardware from Audi and BMW on one end, and the baffling performance of competing ultra SUVs on the other. The Turbo S e-hybrid nudges that model towards the deeper end of the pool. Take the 541 horsepower twin-turbo 4-liter V8 from the Cayenne Turbo, blend it with the instant torque of the Cayenne e-hybrid's 134 horsepower electric motor, and you wind up with a nutty final tally: 664 pound-feet of torque, poured to the pavement via an 8-speed auto and all-wheel drive. Those figures are insane, and they give this massive SUV more grunt than either the Urus or the Cullinan, while offering an all-electric range of around 14 miles. The electric number is a bit of camouflage, designed to allow the Cayenne to survive an internal combustion hostile European city centers without sacrificing any of its venom, which seems to be the vehicle's mission brief: fly under the radar. This Porsche has no interest in bragging. Its sheet metal end balance is indistinguishable from its more common kin. Our tester was a pre-production engineering mule, and Porsche didn't bother to wrap the car in the black and white psychedelic skin we so often see on development. Instead, the company popped the badges off the trunk and went about its business, the Buick gold paint doing enough to hide this thing's nature. But it's not without tells. On the seawall just outside Visby, Gotland's capital, morning light slipped through the SUV's 21-inch wheels and splashed on the massive carbon ceramic rotors. The discs are 17.3 inches up front, pressed by 10-piston aluminum monoblock calipers. The rears are 16.1 inches and paired with 4-piston monoblocks of their own. That's all optional hardware on all other Cayenne, but standard here, as the model is both new and the range topper. Less obvious goodies, like the company's dynamic chassis control, active suspension management, and all the other niceties that come along with the Sport Chrono package, are all standard fare on the Turbo S e-hybrid. Visby has sat with its back against the Baltic Sea for more than 1,100 years. The city's towering limestone walls have watched the world churn and change, almost entirely indifferent to modernity. Its streets are ox-cart wide, occasionally narrow enough to warrant folding the Cayenne's mirrors as we silently slunk past the spectacular remains of one 12th century church after another. The city is packed with them, 12 total, built from 1100 to 1400, most abandoned by religion during the Reformation in the 16th century. Whatever they once represented has been replaced with something calmer but no less powerful. Most are open for anyone to explore. free of charge. In the States, they'd be slathered with graffiti and broken glass, but each is clean and tidy, sanctuaries that seem to keep time at bay. It didn't take long to work our way out of the city, through an arched gate and over what was once a moat, now a deep ditch scattered with the season's first wildflowers. The city gave way to a forest almost immediately. That twin-turbo V8 stayed silent the entire time. The electric motor drove the Cayenne to 83 miles an hour before the engine woke up and took over. This is the same engine and motor combination found in the Panamera Turbo S e-hybrid, and it works just as well here. The handoff is seamless. The Cayenne can function as a pure electric, a pure internal combustion vehicle, or as an actual hybrid, using a blend of the two. A 14.1 kilowatt battery supplies power, and Porsche says it can be fully charged via the standard onboard 7.2 kilowatt charger in less than 2.5 hours. That's only if it's hooked up to a 400 volt 16 amp line. Expect something closer to 6 hours if you're plugging the car into a 240 volt service. Little of that matters on the road. The SUV is an outright pleasure to drive. At 5,623 pounds, the Cayenne should be a barge at civil speeds, but it's quiet and comfortable, deceptively fast. An armada of processors performs miracle after miracle, adjusting the air suspension, tweaking steering angle, interpreting brake force, and shuttling power where needed. But from behind the curtain, none of it is obvious or underfoot. The result is the polar opposite of the heavy-handed hardware on something like a BMW. Whipping the Cayenne down an empty two-lane feels as natural as putting on socks. If putting on socks could spit you to 60 in 3.3 seconds, it is happy where so few SUVs are, well past the shore of legal speed limits. The forest gave way to wide, flat plains, a horizon dotted with ancient windmills. We were headed to a quarry to let the Cayenne loose. We filed past stone crushers and elevators, over a chalk-white road, and stopped to let lumbering dump trucks by, their hoppers full of the same limestone that built Visby. And then Gotland Ring appeared, a 2-mile, 15-turn road course ringed by the modern descendants of those old windmills, their white blades tracing lazy circles in the sky. The track was Alec Hero Haverin's idea. A former professional tennis player and racer, he's exceptionally kind, his brown eyes shining beneath a mop of blonde hair. He's keenly aware that if motorsport has any hope of surviving, it needs to atone for its environmental impact. Gotland Ring is his roadmap for how that might happen. The course is built on property owned by the Nordkalk Corporation, one of Europe's largest limestone providers. The area was originally slated for reclamation, meaning it would slowly return to a natural state but remain a scar on the land. But Haverin had another idea. Use a topography created by mining for a track with materials sourced at the quarry. Doing so would reduce the amount of emissions generated by excessive grade work and material transportation, and the track would turn the acreage into an economic driver for the area. Everything about the place is locally sourced or recycled, from the clubhouse built out of repurposed military barracks to tire barriers made from old quarry conveyor belts. Those towering windmills produce all of the track's power. Haverin calls it the world's first sustainable race course, but what's surprising is that it's excellent to drive. He'd never designed a track before tackling Gotland Ring, but with 13 years of professional racing behind him, including runs at the 24 Hours of the Nürburgring, he knew what he liked. Because he aimed to use as much of the existing topography as possible, the course feels organic and special, more akin to the natural joy of Road America than the digital challenge of Circuit of the Americas. If the Cayenne felt large when we muscled it over Visby's ancient cobblestones, Gotland Ring made it feel doubly so. The staggering power made for blistering entry speeds, especially into turn 1, a wide downhill right-hander after the front straight. The Porsche's brakes had no trouble reining in momentum, but the tires were in constant agony, an endless wail as the Cayenne slid its way through. The whole thing felt eerily similar to ice racing, loose and fun. Here we were on a track built with climate in mind, flinging a hybrid around. It was a glimpse at the possible future where enthusiasts quit willfully ignoring the impact of their passions and seek out solutions to the problems they generate. On the street, the Porsche's hefty curb weight makes for a machine that feels stable and planted. But on track, all that mass is readily apparent. Suspension and rubber doing their damnedest to manage weight transfer. There's understeer at first, likely there to keep hedge fund manager Carl from accidentally swapping ends on his way to the office. But open up the steering a bit, give the throttle a healthy stab, and the Cayenne understands what you're up to, pivoting around its center. Once it's turned, you drive it like a WRX. Point the wheel where you want to go, pin the throttle, and remember to breathe. There's body roll everywhere, the cabin pitching and yelling, but that means the thing tells you what it's up to decades before there's a problem. If you can park the part of your brain that says you're driving a house, it is irrational, illicit fun. Those platter-sized rotors take an astonishing amount of abuse, hauling the Cayenne down from dumb speed over and over again. Yet the brakes are regenerative, but the calibration is as good as it currently gets. The pedal starts firm and stays that way, with predictable bite that builds big trust, while the Panamera Turbo S e-hybrid uses a dual-clutch transmission, The Cayenne's engineers abandoned that gearbox for a traditional automatic. It's better suited for tailwing, they say, and doesn't demand much sacrifice. At any rate, it fires off gears in a blink in either automatic or manual mode. Porsche has always excelled at transmission programming, and the gearbox is perpetually a split second ahead of you, delivering the shift you want before you know you want it. After a few reconnaissance laps, Havrin hopped in his Cayman GT4 to join us. Here is one of Porsche's great driving machines, piloted by legitimate shoe on the track he built. The speed differential should have been laughable, rapier versus axe handle, but the Cayenne had no trouble filling its sibling mirrors. What the big SUV lost in each turn, it gathered up on exit. The all-wheel drive and instant power making easy work of the smaller, lighter car. It wasn't sustainable though. While the Cayman could do that dance all day, the Cayenne was at maximum effort, burning its massive 315 section Pirellis into grease after a half a dozen laps. We came in and chatted. Every vent and shutter in the SUV's fascia was open. The trunk's nostrils flared, fans shoving air through an array of heat exchangers. The sun finally began making its way toward the horizon, the light growing long, but we weren't done. Havrin calls Goatland Ring's current configuration the Northern Loop. An extension, the Southern Loop, will add another 2.6 miles of tarmac, including one of the most dramatic drops of any track in Europe, a 10% grade plummeting from the property's upper plateau to its lower quarry. Most of the grading is done, a mix of wide, flat gravel and tight, technical loose stone. We didn't even have to ask. Havrin pointed us at the loop with a smile. This machine was not made to idle through Beverly Hills or endure the preschool drop-off lot. It was built to twist a gravel road inside and out. Even with no real tire sidewall, the air suspension tuned the uneven surface glossy. Those Pirellis are on the opposite end of the gene pool from a dirt tire, but it didn't seem to matter. The Cayenne flexed its processors. Each wheel fought for grip, found it, and fired bits of stone at the horizon. It's an outright shame that Porsche doesn't campaign this machine in Rally Raid, that we don't get to watch upfitted Cayennes tackle the sands of Chile or the plains of Mongolia, that we're deprived of seeing them flex their bewildering capabilities. Later, we followed the long sunset back to Visby, whisking along under electric power, the Porsche slathered in limestone dust, the interior nearly silent. The first of the city's churches came into view just before dark, gray arches reaching to delicate points. We like to think of Porsche as its old air-cooled self, a brand pointedly determined to build the very best sports car and nothing else. But that memory is as empty as those ancient stone halls. The world has moved on, and for the better of it. People like Havrin and machines like this are proof that our interests can be compatible with those of the planet. That with the right thinking, we are capable of truly amazing things, be it a race course in the middle of the Baltic Sea or a mega power SUV that can tiptoe through city streets. Quick review: the base price and the as tested price was $161,900 and the as tested $188,520. It's powered by a twin turbocharged V8 DOHC 32 valve 4 liter, making 541 horsepower and 567 pound-feet of torque. And then you got the electric motor making 134 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque, for a combined total of 670 horsepower and 664 pound-feet of torque. Doing 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds, the quarter mile at 11.6 seconds at 121 miles an hour, top speed of about 183 miles an hour, stopping from 70 in about 149 feet, weighing 5,623 pounds. Thanks for watching this video and listening. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and that is the end of this magazine. See you on the next one.